So, continuing with the theme of anxiety and fear. So, in the last talk, I set out sort of some very general strategies on how fear could be dealt with and how I dealt with it. But there's a host of practices and aspects of meditation and Buddhist practice that I didn't go into, which can also be used to deal with fear. And here, once again, the fear that I'm talking about is sort of more related to anxiety and psychological fear. So, one of the Buddha's realizations on his night of awakening was that everything in the world, or all conditioned things, are subject to three qualities. The quality of impermanence, in that nothing really always stays the same. It's constantly in a state of flux and change. Not self, in that not self in this instance can refer to the fact that we don't have absolute control over all things, including the body and the emotions. And the third realization is the realization of suffering or dukkha. But in this instance, we can use the first two, the one of impermanence and the one of not self. So when we go into these anxiety inducing situations, or situations where anxiety comes up, one of the things that you can do is you can use the realization of the Buddha on impermanence, that all things are impermanent, to get through it. So in my own case, I had one particular incident that would bring up the anxiety. So what I would do is I would say this incident is only going to take place for, let's say, an hour. And after an hour, that anxiety will go away. And that kind of helped me get through it. So, I could, for that hour or for that period, let the anxiety come, let it be present, and I knew it would pass. And this is how all phenomena are, really. I mean, if you have pain, or you have sadness, or you have fear, or you have anxiety, if we really paid a lot of attention to it, you'd see that it's not constant at all times. It's always in flux. It's always in changing. There would be moments where it's very high. There'd be moments where it's very low, and there'd be moments where it's completely gone. So if you can future project and say, well, this moment of anxiety is only going to last for an hour, or for 2 hours, or whatever. Usually it's not even 2 hours. I mean, it's usually a few minutes, and then it goes away. And that can help you get through it. The other quality of the Buddhist realization that we can use is the quality of not self. So one of the things that I heard from Eckhart Tolle, I would listen to a lot of Eckhart Tolle when I was going through the anxiety, and in an audio recording of The Power of Now, he made this statement. He said, "Not my will, but thy will." So in that moment when you don't have control over the situation, you surrender to it, in the sense that you say, this is not my will, this is thy will. And this is how it is now, in this moment. So you're disidentifying the self or the control. You're relinquishing the control that you have in that situation to maybe a higher power, right? Or the way things are in that moment. So the anxiety will be there, and you don't want it. But in that moment you say, not my will, but thy will. And you surrender to it. And that kind of helps you get through it. And another device or another strategy that you can use, which comes from Buddhism, is the quality of something called Kalyanamita, or spiritual friends. So when you go into those situations, if you have someone in person that can go with you, then that's great. But a lot of times we don't. And in my own case, what I would do is, I have this little MP3 player that I bought in 2008, and I would load it up with Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, the audio, and just listening to the calm of his voice would allay my anxiety somewhat. It would bring it down, just listening to Eckhart. And there was one chapter that I remember very, very clearly. So he talked about the night that he had his breakthrough. So he'd gone through this crisis, and suddenly he came to a park and he sat down, and suddenly thought stopped. Right? Everything stopped. So one of the things that really struck me while I was listening to these talks was a passage where Eckhart Tolle speaks about how he'd had this night or a few days of extreme crises with a lot of discursive thought and a lot of unwanted sort of emotions, and suddenly there he was, and thought just stopped. It was just no more discursive thought. And for me, a big part of my anxiety used to be that discursive thought, the continuing thought that just kept going. You know, the idea or the thought of the anxiety would keep going. And the way he describes it in the book is that he's sitting in a park in London, and I would visualize this park to be something like Hyde Park. And I don't know if people have been to Hyde Park, have seen Hyde Park, but there's a row of seats that runs, you know, along this main road where people can walk and jog and do things like this. And there's trees, beautiful green trees, all the way, and it goes for about a mile or more. And I imagined Eckhart Tolle sitting there at dawn in the morning, where it's very quiet, and suddenly he's at peace, you know. And listening to those passages from The Power of Now brought me peace. So I would have this in my MP3 player as I went into the situation, with Eckhart narrating this story of his, you know, moment of satori, or enlightenment. It's like a momentary enlightenment. So you can, if you don't have a physical friend that can be with you, a physical spiritual friend that can be with you, then you can carry the voice of a teacher. I routinely listen to my teachers, Ajahn Suchito or Joseph Goldstein. Actually, when I started out practicing, I'd listen to a lot of Joseph Goldstein, because they all have these voices which are soft and sonorous and warm and calming, and it just brings your system into a state of calm. So that's a very good device. And then a longer term practice that can help with anxiety is to cultivate a daily meditation practice. Now, this isn't something that's going to fix your anxiety in 2 weeks or a month. Maybe if you do it for a year, you have a morning practice and an evening practice, and you regularly start to come into a state where things slow down for you, that sort of becomes embodied. So your nervous system or your neurology starts to make those connections in your brain and in your nervous system of just slowing down and coming to a pause. And now I can do this almost at will after many, many, many years of practice. It doesn't take away the anxiety, but it just brings down things by a notch. Suddenly you just have this moment of calm. System comes down to a halt. And a lot of meditation teachers talk about this. One of my teachers talks about an experience where he was in a canoe rafting. And suddenly this canoe turned over and he was submerged in these little canoes under the water. And a lot of people perish in that situation because they panic and they don't remember the procedure that the trainers given them before they got into the canoe to turn it back around. And in that moment when that happened, he went into that state of calm and somehow remembered how to do that and turn the canoe around. And similarly, being attacked by bandits. This is another story from my teacher. And in that moment where the bandits are attacking him and his friends in a group, the friends are extremely panicked, and suddenly my teacher, Ajahn Sucitto, just, even though it's a panicky situation, he surrenders to it and he comes into the moment. And somehow his calm in that moment diffuses the situation. So there's a lot to be said about having a daily practice, about practicing for a few years, sitting, standing, walking, whatever, Tai Chi, Qigong, if that's how you want to practice, whatever your mode of practice is. So these are the meditation related means or upayas that one can use to deal with fear. And of course, another really big one that I've missed out is the practice of loving kindness. So every day, as part of your practice, you sit down and you start with this being and you say, may I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I feel safe and protected. This is just a very simple one. There's different chants, and you sort of repeat that mantra to yourself, and then you extend it out to people that you care about, and then you extend it out to people that you're neutral to, and then you extend it out to people that you don't have favorable feelings for. And what you're doing with this is you're generating a field inside yourself of loving kindness, of acceptance. And the more you cultivate this and the more you generate it, and the stronger it gets, when the fear comes or the anxiety comes, you can almost just have this moment where you say, oh, I don't want to be angry with this feeling that's here. I don't want to be non-accepting of it. I can allow it to be here. May it be well. May this being be well. And that sort of helps. Like I previously said, love is the opposite of fear. So you're bringing love into the situation, and then fear can't remain, because all conditioned things are sort of an either or. So you're creating a condition of love to replace the fear. And in a sense, you're not even pushing the fear away. What you're doing is you're creating space so the fear can express itself. And once it's expressed itself, it leaves. So those are the ways that I have used and that I know of in terms of the Buddhist practice or the meditation practice that can be used to deal with fear.